the battlefield with tanks, artillery pieces, and airplanes. So they say that a new front has, and they've all used this word, a new front has been opened up in Israel, and it's a human rights front. It's human rights engaged in political militancy. Two organizations spring to mind. One is an organization called B'Tselem. Now, what does B'Tselem do? B'Tselem is interested in recording infractions by Israeli military men in the field. And how do they do this? When an Israeli soldier has been deployed in the West Bank, or anywhere in Israel for that matter, he is surrounded by protesters and activists with handheld cameras, sometimes just inches from his face. He's standing there and surrounded, as you saw in some of the pictures that I showed you before, and as you saw in the trailer done for the book. While that's happening, the Palestinian and left-wing Israeli protesters are taunting the soldiers. They're insulting his mother. They're insulting his country. They're insulting his manhood. They're insulting his humanity. They're taking flags and hitting his face mask. The parents are engaged in classic child endangerment, classic human shield action. They take their own kids and they push their kids right into a guy's M16. When finally, cameras rolling, if and should the soldier react, that is videotaped and that is sent up to the internet and is the basis for a boycott action or a prosecution or a complaint or the portrayal of Israeli military men as brutes and bullies, even though they're probably the only military in the Middle East and one of the few in the world that I can tell you about, where every soldier carries in his vest and his shirt pockets a small card reminding him of what his honor and duty is to civilians. They take it seriously. And Israel has a civilian army, and every high school kid does his time for a couple of years when he gets out of high school and before he goes to college. But there is no wiggle room for human rights in the Israeli army. Is it possible for Israeli military transgressions throughout history? I've written a few books of history, about 10. Going back to the first professional military men, that is the first salaried military men in history, well, would be the Roman centurions and the Roman army. There have always been infractions. That's always going to be the case. That's why we have human rights, to make sure that there is a law and a standard. But human rights must never be political. Human rights must never draw a sharp line at one man's religion. Everybody is entitled to the same level of human rights. And even soldiers have human rights. That's called for in many of the Geneva Treaties. So, we have a situation where people are playing for the camera. Now, I record one situation in the book in a town called Nabi Saleh. Nabi Saleh is a small town. It's a hamlet. Its residence numbers 550 to maybe 580 persons. They're all related through direct or indirect family links. They're all part of one family. And these individuals have a staged riot every Friday. It's not a spontaneous protest. It's a staged, orchestrated, planned protest. Everybody knows what to do. They march down the hill. and they try to get to the road to close the road. The road is several meters down the hill. Remember this, all media, all legislators, all observers of the Middle East and of the Israel-Palestinian conflict. We're not talking about miles here. We're talking about meters. It is sometimes, the distance involved is oftentimes shorter than from this wall to the edge of the building. The protesters come down. The parents shove the kids into the soldiers because the soldiers let them protest. They protest all through town, but when they approach the road must be to the capital of Israel and its other cities must be kept open. The kids are pushed. The soldiers are prepped and trained. I've been in their sessions. I had bulletproof vest. I had a Kevlar helmet. I was ready for the riots, for the tear gas and the Molotov cocktails. And if and when the soldiers react, B'Tselem and its volunteers, who are actually members of the protest, will be there to capture the footage. Now this is interesting. The volunteers for B'Tselem are actually the protesters themselves, or the cousin of the protester, or living in the household of the protester, or the next door neighbor of the protester. And these cameras are coming from money which has been provided by the New Israel Fund and by other organizations similarly situated who feel it's their goal to have this situation play out. And it does play out. It plays out every Friday at approximately 1 p.m. As a journalist, I was told exactly what time to leave my hotel, exactly what time to arrive, exactly what time the riot would start, and exactly what time things would get hot. They played to the camera, and in this case, it was my photographer. My photographer was stuck in a traffic jam. My photographer didn't leave his hotel in time, or didn't leave his home in time. He was stuck. I got all these people ready to riot. I got the soldiers standing with their face masks and their guns. Nothing's happening. Why? No photographer. So there's a videotape on the internet right now of me with the protesters complaining that there's been no act of violence by the soldiers against their protest, and that's a fraud, and the fraud is being perpetrated because I am there to watch it. And they're actually complaining. This will be the first time in the history of the nonviolent movement that people have bitterly complained that their protest was not hit by soldiers. And then my photographer, his name was Boaz, he finally got with the program, and he showed up. I said, it's all over. You're late. He said, I did the best I could. Susie's there with the big-bodied, wide-angle lens and the mechanized camera bodies and the Rolex and all this, and the lights and all this kind of stuff. They see him, the riot starts. Rocks get thrown, crowd control measures go into effect. The scene is made for people are playing for the camera. If those cameras were not there, the action would not take place. And what does that mean? That means there could be one Friday at that town without a riot. Wouldn't that be a start? Just a tiny little start. Beyond that, one of the chief organizers of the protest gets paid, gets compensated to record the details, but only when there's an act of violence with injured parties. That means getting Israelis prosecuted as war criminals in international tribunals. Israel is surrounded in a sea of war crimes. They're surrounded at the north by Syria, where I had to revise, I spent 6 months writing my book, I had to revise the death toll 3 times and the refugee toll 3 times because there are so many millions of refugees and such a high 6-digit number of massacred deaths in every family. Lebanon, where there are sectarian bombings to the north, to Israel's south and to Israel's west. Individuals can be splashed with acid because they have not followed certain types of law. There is people have political differences in Gaza, in Egypt. They throw them off rooftops. They don't even have kangaroo courts. They just see them. They convict them by virtue of an eye, of a visual decision, and they throw them off rooftops. But these organizations are dedicated to convicting Israelis, so Israelis feel they cannot make the right decision in the field because no matter what they do, they're going to be second-guessed and triple-guessed, possibly in a court of law, possibly in an international war crime tribunal. Now, I also found fascinating when I followed the money of these organizations that while there are Jewish donors giving money to the New Israel Fund to give to B'Tselem and Adalah, for some reason, these organizations, I don't want to zero in on them alone, there are many others, these organizations are also getting abundant financing from funds, banks, and other institutions which are controlled by Iran, Saudi Arabia, and Iraq. So what is the common intersection between Iranian and Saudi funding and the funding that comes out of greater New York City and Boston and all over the world? So this brings up the issue of how do we close the loopholes? You know, closing the loopholes is something we do in this country. God knows there's enough loopholes to drive a Mack truck through. And the first thing we do is we call into question how the money is being spent. We found out that the Internal Revenue Service in this country knows the concept of political action, and they take lots of steps when they want to. So now it is time for the IRS and the legislatures to determine if the 501c3 status of these organizations is justified, or part of it may not be justified, because there's so much good work that the New Israel Fund is doing that it is just this monumental wing that has to be addressed. And then, of course, we have to look at the donors. If the donors know that their money is circumventing the spirit of the law, if the donors are doing this deliberately, naturally there would be prosecution and clawback and penalties. I believe that most of the donors are not aware of what is going on, and that means that the phrase "did know" or "should have known" comes into play. That's the phrase that they give to us, and then we will have to ask, were you aware that your money was funding this? Did you do your due diligence? Is there amnesty? A question of amnesty should be extended. Or, a better way to say it, draw a bright line in the road as of today. We now know that there are questions. It is possible that donors, with the best feeling in their hearts, have given to a cause, and not just the New Israel Fund, but many others, that is spending their monies in ways that they might not think correct, that they might not want to happen. And here's the interesting part. The New Israel Fund is doing nothing beneath the table. The New Israel Fund is doing nothing sub rosa. They're completely transparent. You don't need an investigative reporter named Edwin Black to figure this stuff out. You just need a laptop and a mouse and a Google account. And you can go up there and you can see all the activities that are being done. They're completely transparent. All the monies that are being spent. And you would do the same due diligence that you would do in an organization that you were investing in. Because that's what a donation is, an investment. Are we going to invest in peace? Are we going to invest in confrontation? And the answer is, we need to invest in peace, because while I was in Israel, I found that this same nation of Israel that is under attack, 70,000 Palestinians each day, that 70,000 are going into Israel across this line and working for Israeli wages. Equal wage, equal work conditions, equal employment, lots of watchdogs to make sure it happens. But these people are hiding in the shadows. They don't have videographers following them around. We have pictures of them in the book with their faces blocked out. And their facial characteristics change because we don't want to get them killed. What's their death sentence? Living and working in peace with Israelis, with their neighbors.